volunteer firefighters and fire departments, are they still deserving a seat at the table in the conversation of public safety, or are they just old, antiquated relics of the past that need to be retired into the pages of history? How about ambulance desert zones and the roles that volunteer fire departments actually play in maintaining the well-being and safety of these communities? All that and more in today's episode of the podcast, but as always, we got to get in service, get this baby airborne, so we got to go 10-8, wheels up, visors down, fly in today's Welcome aboard the Flight Deck, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Flight Medic Barry. I'll be your host on today's trek into volunteer territory. We're going to talk about some of the stigmas, or more like stereotypes, associated with volunteers and some unjustifiable and really unfair assessments of volunteers as a whole. And I will state ahead of time that there's a little bit of biases in this, as I am a volunteer myself, and I can speak from my anecdotal experience, but I'm also the type that likes to do my research. I look at the data, look at the research, and objectively form an opinion instead of just listening from a friend of a friend, or having a bad run-in with one person and thinking that that is the whole product, and then therefore volunteers as a whole are just a bunch of box of rocks and need to be retired into the pages of oblivion. And I don't believe that in one bit, because the data and the statistics and what is in front of us actually states they're incredibly useful, and far more useful than they may be given credit for, right? Because what is a volunteer? Let's establish that. A volunteer is a unpaid, usually, or sometimes they get a small stipend for a call they go on, and they are doing this on their time off. They usually have, majority of the time, primary jobs in other fields like lawyer, doctor, physicist, or car salesman, you name it, doesn't matter. But then they've also taken it upon themselves to get extra training in order to, on their time off, when most people are getting much needed R&R with their friends and their family, they're running into calls, if necessary, on their time off to help citizens even further. That's very commendable and honorable. Just that pursuit in general should be like, wow, man, a lot of people are like, I'm clocked out, I'm going home, I'm not, nope, I'm off the clock. There's people who are off the clock and ready to run in and do it some more. Like, they just can't get enough. And that is a really special type of individual willing to do that. There's people who are in EMS who then decide, hey, I'm going to go volunteer on my time off. And so, like, man, that's another level of individual, right? Because, like, most of us are like, hey, man, I've had enough. I got my fair share in this shift. I don't want to go and do it again. But so that's just laying down, right, the foundation of a volunteer at its core is what their ethos is, what's in their heart, that endless desire to serve beyond just getting paid. It isn't even about that anymore. It's about just the act of service to your fellow human being. And so that's, I think, something that's a little different, but you're not doing it as a paycheck. You're not doing it for a job. You're doing it for the love of what you do, the love of giving to your community, the passion to give your skill set to the community in whatever capacity that is. And that is awesome. And it's amazing. And that's really volunteer fundamental on its face. That's volunteer. But that somehow gets mixed and polluted into this convoluted idea that somehow they're a bunch of hillbilly backwoods, Joe Dirts running around causing chaos. And again, if you've had a bad run-in with a firefighter that's volunteer, that does not mean that there's the whole product. Your volunteers in your area may be not as good, or may lack some things that need help on and stuff, and that's a different story. But that goes the same for paid. There's good paid departments, bad paid departments, good eggs, bad eggs. So that doesn't translate to, it's only volunteers are the bad guys, right? Because when we really dissect this objectively and look at it, so what is the standard of training, right? The initial, memes and, right, there's friendly banter, and then there's pathological opinions that are pushing the ball either for or against the volunteer configuration altogether, right? And the friendly banter, right, that's all in good fun. But when you're talking about the actual trying to make it non-existent, you need to really be backing that up and supporting your claims, other than, they don't get trained. Well, according to the NFPA rules, you have to have a minimum of 110 hours of training in order to, meet the volunteer fire department standards, that what they require is the minimum standards, 110. And I'll say I have 180 hours. And I'm not saying that to beat my chest, say, look at me and my ego. That's just to say we're exceeding, at least the department we're at, we're exceeding, we're at 180. At least going off of that metric, right? 110, we're at 180. And then we're doing training evolutions all the time on things that you would probably not expect, right? We're working and hustling. We're using the time wisely. And so I'm just telling you from a perspective of being internal and kind of like being the inside man, telling you, hey, some of these things aren't really a fair assessment, because some of these they're training their butts off. They realize they got the chip, there's like a chip on your shoulder. Everybody's looking at you like you're a bunch of, it is pretty bizarre to see that I could walk around with a volunteer shirt on and automatically get diminished in value. I mean, you can tell the way I'm being treated is different, but they don't realize I'm a flight medic on my other in my other life. But as soon as I walk in with a flight medic, I somehow get a different level of respect. And I think that is a bunch of cockamamie. That is trash. That all because of my uniform that is on me, suddenly that determines who I am as an individual, how I deserve to be treated, not the fact that I'm just a human being that is here to try to do good and help and make a difference and play a role in serving. But we have it in our high and mighty heads sometimes. Our egos cannot be foregone and put to the side and realize, hey, this person's here trying to do the best they can. As long as we're not out here doing safety things that are doing harm or causing safety violations, I don't see why they get so much hate. And it actually was very hard for me to wrap my mind around, coming from a mainly career everything to going to just feeling the urge and the need to serve in a different capacity on top of what I already do, and seeing the absolute unjustified treatment that these volunteers get. It's sickening, and it makes me really mad, because I'm like, it's not justified in any way. Maybe you had a bad run-in with these guys 20 years ago or whatever, but that's not fair, because these guys would put our EMTs up against even the career EMTs, and I would somebody take me up on that. And that's largely because they come from career EMTs. They're just doing this on their time off. So this weird judgment, the moment you throw a volunteer on your shirt, suddenly you've been devalued. And then there's this kind of feeling dirty aspect of being a volunteer. And that's wrong. It is wrong in every sense of the imagination. Just because somebody wants to serve in a different capacity and they're not getting paid to do it, and they've got other jobs and other obligations, but they're making time to be of service, right? And I can go on and on about this, but do you know how many of our first responders are volunteers, especially firefighters? Over 670,000 out of the 1 million that are active for firefighters, both career and volunteer. So that's basically saying around just under 70%-ish is comprised. So we have more volunteers than we do actually career firefighters. And that's not to say, oh, we have more than you. That has nothing to do with that. More so, it's just to say there's a lot more of them out there than maybe initially you would have thought. And then 2.3-ish million citizens live in rural communities. So that puts us in a precarious position, because rural communities cannot necessarily afford or have the resources, the manpower, the talent in their jurisdiction to be able to have a fully set up career department. And so then they got to start pulling talent from, people who do other jobs, maybe the local vet, the local doctor, or the local lawyer, or whatever, the local farmer, right? That's how they can surplus that, or they can supplement, I should say, their talent. Because not very many people, if any, are going to drive, which I've actually been surprised to see at least at the department that I'm at, the willingness for people to drive long periods over hours to get to this department in order to serve this community that isn't even technically theirs. It's become theirs by proxy now, but it's not even the community they live in. But they're like, I'm going to drive that distance in order to be there to serve and stay overnight and be, like no different. So, but this kind of transitions us to talk about ambulance desert zones. And an ambulance desert zone is defined by an area that is further away from your nearest ambulance by 25 minutes or more. And I could tell you that this fire department that I serve at is in an ambulance desert zone. And crazy enough, out of the 40 plus states studied, 4 out of 5 counties had an ambulance desert zone. So it's not like this is a uncommon thing. Ambulance desert zones are everywhere. And 2.3 million citizens live in these areas of ambulance desert zones where there's an ambulance that is further away by 25 minutes or more. In some circumstances at the department that I'm at, you can get an ambulance 30 plus minutes away. So what do you do now? How do you supplement emergency care to give the citizens the best chance of survival and preserving life and property? It's your volunteers. You have, even if you have a stance against volunteers, you don't have a choice. There's not a choice. Our hands are tied in that regard. So we've kind of diminished the training argument because their training, at least per state, standard of NFPA, states that they need to be 110 hours minimum. But here's the other thing: is the requirement states that they need to be able to make an attack on a structure within 2 minutes of arrival 90% of the time. So within 90% of the time, they should be able to be prepared and ready to make an attack on a structure if necessary within 2 minutes of arrival. That's fairly good and I think impressive from people who may be coming from home. And they're coming from home, going to pick up an apparatus, getting their gear on, and rushing into the situation, and they need to be ready to make an attack on that within 2 minutes, right? So these are all the facts, right? This is the facts. This isn't my opinion per se. Of course, there's interlaced of my experience, but I came into it completely blinded myself, hearing all these things about volunteers, seeing the memes, seeing all that stuff, and then experiencing the fact that that's so counter to what is true. At least I'm speaking from that perspective, right? There's probably departments in a large amount of volunteers departments that might not be meeting expectations and stuff like that, but I venture to guess there's career departments out there doing the same, that there are career departments that are not meeting standard either, or doing things that aren't up to par. Does not, because you have volunteer in front of your name, does not suddenly diminish your value, and you automatically, right? And sometimes it's already just assumed, they're a bunch of volunteers. Well, man, I find that, slightly bothersome that that there are positions in that, right? If you can present objective evidence, objective argument, a rational argument instead of an opinionated argument, then I'm here to listen, right? I'm here to listen to the facts, to an objective, fair argument all day long. But if it's just, I had this one experience with this one dude, that's not a data point. It could be an outlier, right? So something we need to consider. Ambulance desert zones are all over the place in the United States. And you think, I drove through Montana and some of those, flyover states and the Dakotas and stuff. And I'm like, oh my gosh, response out here would probably be absolute craziness. And so there you go, right? Volunteers are a lot more important than we may realize, and we need them. They're just a necessity that cannot go away because we do not have an answer for that. We do not have another solution to say if we think volunteers are not good enough for whatever reason. We do not have another argument. There's no solution to fix that. So instead, we build up our volunteers. We strengthen their training abilities and training opportunities and all that stuff and get them stronger rather than, and we do this in the paid areas, right? When we think a skill, instead of training somebody to do something, right? Like, we think you shouldn't have RSI because, that's such an advanced skill and whatever. We're not investing in our people. Invest in your people, and the end product you're going to get is going to be worth all that in a bag of chips. This is just a stance to say, let's follow the data, follow the evidence, follow what is currently, out there. Those data points I pointed out was done by a study to really look at ambulance desert zones, how much we're dealing with. And there are some areas that there has less than 3 ambulances covering a incredible large square mileage of real estate. So you got 3 ambulances hustling and bustling across large, vast areas of land. Who's going to be the first guys on scene? Guys and gals. It's going to be our volunteers. So love them or hate them, you ain't got a choice, right? And the fact of the matter is some of the opinions of these volunteers, I've, done some evolutions with guys from different places that are volunteers, and they're jam up. They know the knowledge. Of course, there's going to be discrepancies between career. That's not to diminish the value of a career at all. It's just to present the case here that volunteers have a lot more right at the table than they may be given, or at least initially thought, right? And some people have got their humble beginnings as a volunteer, got the bug for fire, right? And I've seen career fire departments, and some of them, because of all the politics and all that nonsense, make that can be a toxic environment sometimes. But the volunteer department, everybody's there because they want to be, not because they have to be, because they want to be. They could easily just not come. They could just leave in the middle of the shift if they felt like it, but they stay. I've never seen some people run flying out of a station ready to go and excited to go on a headache call, to go on a fall lift assist, right? The passion that you've got, the reinvigorated for the job, for the profession, what it means. So instead of judgment, go to your local volunteer. Maybe see how you can help. If you find that instead of being a problem, seeing the problems, offer solutions. And I'll cap that off. I'll conclude it off in that, right? If you have this issue with your volunteer department, why don't you go make a change? You can. You might be able to make a change and make an impact. Start serving, slowly work your way up and incorporating new ideas. Hey, we do it here and we do it like this. And all of a sudden you've got a department to be proud of. Be a force of change instead of just all this judgment. And we have a tendency to do that. We will form all of these opinions and kind of, but we don't offer solutions, how we can fix it. Well, let's build them up. How can we take my expertise that I may have or you may have and come together and strengthen this thing to make it something worthwhile, right? So I think volunteers are here to stay, at least for the foreseeable future, because there's just no answer for the rural component. And I've been on the receiving end of being out isolated in an area where you had a critical patient and your nearest ambulance is coming from 20 plus minutes away, if not longer, 33 minutes away for a cardiac arrest. Volunteers is all you got. So if that's all you got, the best thing we can do now is go, well, if you're here to stay, then let's train you up and get you all to be solid providers if you feel like training is a problem. Be the voice of the solution. Be the solution, not the part of the problem, or just parroting the same things everybody else saying, well, they're this and all, I can go on, and I'm not trying to. I'm just trying to say, instead of us always finding a problem and complaining about it, and that's all we ever do, is go, how can I help be a voice of change? How can I help elevate them to a higher level? Let's elevate each other. We're all part of the same family. We all want to do the same thing. We're all here to try to help. We're all here to try to make a difference and act upon the calling that has been bestowed upon us. So let's get after it. Let's be part of a team, a part of a family, the brotherhood that we so claim. Let's not use it as a talking point or a punchline or some kind of really, cool thing we say. Let's live by that code and creed as brotherhood. You are my brother in arms and service. If we get on scene to a bad situation, I'm not looking at you going, are you paid? Are you volunteer? Are you paid? It's like, let's just get the job done. Let's go to work. Right? Let's go to Jobtown, right? Let's go to work as a team, as a family, as a brotherhood and a sisterhood that the fire department was formed on, right? I've seen some locked in, straight up, squared away volunteer departments. So to say that they don't exist is a straight up lie. And it's just basically trying to justify the reason why you don't like them. And I think you should maybe go visit departments and actually see them for yourself. Maybe even do a shift right along with them or hang out with them, get to know what they know, versus just seeing a bad actor and going, well, that's all volunteers are a bunch of useless fools. And I'm here to tell you that from a large experience in the career sector and then dipping into the volunteer sector, I think that a lot of those stereotypes and things that were thrusted upon volunteers is entirely not fair and unjustified. And we paint everybody with a broad brush, and we do that all throughout, not just in this particular small micro environment, but we do that all the time in a lot of areas where we see a situation and we assume that is how it is always all over. And that's not true. So I think we should just give our volunteer firefighters more grace, a little bit more respect that is due, the fact that they serve outside of what is expected of them. They go and get additional training to try to be better service of their areas, knowing that ambulances are much further away. And I think that should be commended, because without them, there would be nothing in those areas and citizens would have nothing. And so chances of survival and mortality and morbidity would increase substantially, exponentially, without these providers to get on scene and do something and try to get something going. And so I think we should cap it off at that. So I think we should put this bird on the ground, go 10-7, visors up, wheels down. Services.